Harold Whitman sat alone in the cold garage, the smell of dust and motor oil thick in the air, surrounded by rusted tools hanging from pegboards like relics from a forgotten life. His knees ached, the kind of dull, persistent pain that reminded him every time he moved that 72 wasn't a number, it was a weight. Outside, the wind rattled the aluminum siding of his Ohio home, a sharp autumn breeze sweeping leaves across the driveway he hadn't shoveled in 3 years. A battered thermos of lukewarm coffee sat beside him on the workbench, half-finished, like everything else in his life. In front of him sat the old model rocket, or what was left of it, faded fins, a cracked nose cone, wiring that hadn't sparked since Reagan was president. He'd started building it in 1984, the year his son David was born. They were going to launch it together, back when Harold still believed in things like dreams and legacy and lifting your eyes to the sky. But time got in the way, as it always does. Jobs, bills, disappointments. And now, all he had left was this broken artifact of who he used to be. His television was on in the corner, sound low, showing footage of a rocket landing gently back on Earth like a ballerina in slow motion. The announcer's voice cracked with excitement. SpaceX has done it again, another successful booster recovery. Elon Musk's vision of reusable rockets is no longer science fiction. Harold looked up slowly, eyes narrowing. The camera zoomed in on the rocket's scorch-marked body as it touched down vertically, tall and steady. The screen cut to a clip of Musk in his black jacket, smirking slightly, his words crisp, "Failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you're not innovating enough." Harold felt something stir in his chest, maybe resentment, maybe admiration, maybe just heartburn, but it didn't matter. The word stayed. Failure is an option here. That line played over in his mind as he looked at the rocket's shell before him. He reached out, brushing his fingers across the fuselage like greeting an old friend he'd abandoned without a word. The metal was cold, lifeless, but still waiting. Just like him. He pulled the stool closer, slowly lowering himself onto it. His knees cracked in protest. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. Inside, everything was still. His eyes drifted to the TV again. Elon was talking about Mars, colonization, building the impossible with people who had no business succeeding. Harold took a sip of the bitter coffee and shook his head. Reusable rockets, he muttered aloud, hell, I feel more like space junk. His voice sounded foreign in the garage, hoarse, uncertain, like it hadn't been used in weeks. Which it hadn't. He hadn't spoken to another human being in 5 days. David hadn't called in over a year. They hadn't spoken much since his wife, Mary, died. David blamed him for not fighting harder, for retreating into silence, for giving up. Maybe he was right. Harold didn't fight back. Didn't know how. The last time they spoke, Harold had said, "It's too late for some things, son." David replied, "Only if you believe that." Then he hung up. That was Christmas, 2023. A long time ago. The garage felt colder now. He stood slowly, shuffled toward the corner where he kept an old crate marked, Project, Star Launch. Inside were blueprints, yellowed with age, carefully rolled. He opened one. The handwriting was his own, neat, steady, the kind he'd taken pride in back when he still believed he could build something that mattered. Along the side of the paper, in a boy's handwriting, a crayon scribble, "Me and Dad's rocket to space." Harold stared at it. His chest tightened. He sat back down, paper in hand, and unfolded the entire blueprint across the bench. He could almost hear David's voice from 30 years ago, "We're gonna go to the moon, right, Dad?" He remembered lying. Maybe further. The wind outside howled again. A loose screw rolled across the table. Harold reached for a pencil and made a small mark on the blueprint, nothing major, just a correction to the stabilizer angle. A small thing. A forgotten instinct. Then another. Then another. An hour passed before he realized he hadn't checked his phone, hadn't stared at the clock, hadn't thought about the ache in his back. Just focused. Just building. When he finally stood, it was with difficulty, but also with a strange sense of being alive. A little dizzy, he leaned on the workbench and whispered, "Reusable doesn't mean worthless." He looked up at the TV again. The screen now showed Elon Musk walking with a group of engineers, mostly younger than David. The cheer-in read, "Musk on aging, you're not obsolete. You're underutilized." Harold snorted. "Tell that to my knees." But the words stuck anyway. Obsolete. Underutilized. It was how he felt every morning when he opened his eyes to another day of silence. But now, standing in this cold garage with graphite on his fingers and blueprints under his elbow, he didn't feel obsolete. He felt unfinished. That night, instead of going straight to bed, Harold sat at his old desktop computer and opened an email draft. To David Whitman. Subject, "Hey son." He stared at the blinking cursor. Typed, "I was working on the old rocket today. Remember that? I think I might actually finish it." He paused. Deleted it. Rewrote, "You were right. It's not too late. Not for this." Again, he paused. Then, without sending, he closed the window and shut the computer down. But the email was saved in drafts. Waiting. Like everything else. The next morning, he dusted off the workbench entirely. Rearranged the tools. Went online to look up hobby parts. He hadn't ordered anything in years. Didn't trust credit cards. But he clicked, by now, on a pack of carbon fiber fins and ignition switches. When the receipt came through, he whispered, "Guess I'm launching after all." That afternoon, he joined a Facebook group called American Backyard Rocketeers. Mostly younger people, but a few older names. He introduced himself. 72, widowed. Trying again. Not sure if I've got it in me. But I started building a rocket I abandoned in 1984. Thought it was too late. Maybe it's not. Within an hour, a few comments rolled in. "It's never too late, Harold." "Hell yeah, old man." "Post pics." He smiled. Small. Just a twitch. But real. He posted a photo of the rocket frame. Caption, "Back from the dead." Later that night, the wind settled. The moon was bright. Harold stood in the backyard, looking up, hands in his coat pockets. Above, the stars blinked quietly. Somewhere out there, SpaceX was preparing another launch. Somewhere in that sky, dreams were still flying. And for the first time in years, Harold whispered to the night, "What if everything I believed about getting old was wrong?" Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Before the arthritis, before the silence of a house too big for one man, before the long walks through grocery stores just to hear another human voice, Harold Whitman was a builder. Not in the fancy sense, he didn't wear a hard hat or design skyscrapers, but in his bones, he built things. He built clocks that worked when the power went out, radios that could pick up Canadian stations on stormy nights, wooden shelves that still held books long after the wallpaper peeled. And once, a long time ago, he almost built a rocket that could fly. He was 29 the first time he traced out a rocket fuselage on his garage floor, chalking it onto the concrete like a priest preparing a sacred ritual. Mary had come out with a glass of iced tea, one hand resting on her round belly, 8 months pregnant with their only son. "You sure this is safe?" she asked, smiling with that curious mix of amusement and concern he'd loved from the start. He'd looked up from the ground, holding a piece of PVC pipe, and grinned. "Absolutely not," he said, "but it's going to be incredible." She shook her head, laughing. "Just don't blow us to kingdom come before the baby gets here." He didn't, of course. He never got far enough to blow anything up. Life intervened, the way it always does. He started working longer hours at the tool and die shop. The cost of diapers and formula replaced the cost of model engines and launch pads. The plans got rolled up and pushed to the back of the garage, alongside a box of baby clothes David would outgrow before Harold even noticed. Then came the years that blurred together: soccer games, school concerts, deadlines, layoffs, short-term dreams traded for long-term survival. Somewhere in that blur, Harold stopped building anything that didn't have a practical purpose. And then he stopped building altogether. His hands, once precise and steady, had become stiff, clumsy. They fumbled buttons, dropped coins, struggled to hold a wrench for more than 5 minutes. Mary would massage his knuckles at night, humming softly, never complaining, even as the cancer spread through her like wildfire through a dry forest. After she passed, the garage became a tomb. Dust layered the workbench like ash. Harold avoided it. It hurt to look at the tools, to see them idle. It hurt worse to know he no longer felt worthy of them. But last night had changed something. Maybe it was Elon's voice, or the rocket landing upright like a miracle of math and madness. Maybe it was the blueprint he found with David's scribbles still bright after all these years. Maybe it was just the way the silence had become unbearable. But this morning, Harold stood in the garage with the overhead light humming and the smell of WD-40 thick in the air, his eyes on the blueprint spread flat on the workbench. He was studying the nose cone design when a memory came back with the clarity of film. David at age 9, standing on a step stool beside him, holding a soldering iron with both hands. "Is this how you do it?" he'd asked, face squinting with concentration. Harold had taken his hands gently, guiding them. "Not quite. Let me show you." And for one fleeting second, he could feel it again, the weight of his son's hands in his, the feeling of passing something down that mattered. They'd called the project Star Launch 1. David had drawn a logo for it, just a crooked star with a circle around it, and Harold had tacked it to the corkboard above the bench. He looked now. It was still there. Faded, curling at the edges, but there. He touched it lightly, afraid it might crumble. And that was the moment he realized something strange and powerful. The rocket wasn't the only thing he'd left unfinished. David had once worshipped him. The boy followed him around like a shadow, always asking questions, always wanting to help. And Harold, trying to provide, had shut the door more times than he opened it. "I'm working," he'd said. "Not now. Later, kiddo." But later never came. And when David grew older, more independent, more distant, Harold didn't know how to bridge the gap. They argued when David went to college out west instead of staying local. They argued when David married a woman Harold didn't approve of, though he could never explain why. Then came the cancer, and everything went quiet. In the year after Mary died, David called 3 times. Harold answered once. The silence became their language. Until yesterday. Now, standing in this garage full of ghosts and gears, Harold realized he didn't just want to finish the rocket. He needed to. Not for the science. Not for the spectacle. But because somewhere inside that rocket lived the version of himself he'd abandoned. And maybe, just maybe, finishing it could bring David back, not physically, not immediately, but back to a place where talking was possible. Where something could be repaired. He spent the rest of the day inventorying what he had and didn't have. Most of the materials were outdated. The epoxy had hardened, the wiring brittle, the frame warped. But the bones were good. The design still made sense. He could work with this. He could rebuild. He ordered parts online, something he'd always avoided, preferring to walk the aisles of a store, feel things with his hands. But the times had changed. The world had gotten faster, louder, more virtual. And Harold, like his rocket, had been left behind. Until now. While the order processed, he dug deeper into the garage, pulling out old notebooks filled with sketches, calculations, articles about propulsion and aerodynamics. He found one clipping from 2002, an article titled, "South African Entrepreneur Wants to Send People to Mars." A young Elon Musk stared from the page, wild-eyed, ambitious. Harold had circled the quote, "We're going to make space travel like air travel, accessible, affordable, and frequent." He'd written next to it in pencil, "Crazy or genius?" Looking back now, the answer seemed obvious. Musk hadn't just dreamed, he built. He failed, spectacularly at times. But he kept building. That night, Harold watched old interviews with Musk. One stood out. Elon was talking about how people thought he was insane to try building rockets from scratch. "I just thought, why not," he said. "I figured even if we fail, we'll learn something." Harold whispered the words to himself. Why not? Even if we fail, we'll learn something. He went to bed with oil on his fingers and the blueprint unrolled across the kitchen table. For the first time in years, he didn't take a sleeping pill. He didn't need it. He dreamed of launch pads, of countdowns, of a young boy holding his hand and asking, "Is it time yet, Dad?" And in the dream, he answered, "Almost, kiddo. Almost." The next morning, his hands ached like hell. But he moved anyway. Because something inside him was moving, too. Not fast. Not without pain. But unmistakably alive. When the parts arrived 3 days later, he opened the box with the excitement of a child on Christmas morning. Carbon fiber fins. Microcontroller igniter. Reinforced tubing. All sleek, light, modern. A strange contrast to the old world tools hanging behind him. But he could make them work together. Old and new. Rebuilt. That evening, he posted in the Facebook group again. Update, new parts arrived. Hands don't work like they used to, but still building. Feels like 1984 in here. One piece at a time. Dozens of responses poured in. One said, "You're my hero, man." Another, "My grandpa gave up after his stroke. Wish he'd kept building." Another. "Following every step. Launch it for all of us." Harold read them, stunned. He hadn't expected anyone to care. But maybe that was the point. Maybe everyone, at some level, wants permission to believe it's not too late. Maybe that's all he was doing, giving himself permission. As the sun dipped below the trees that night, casting the garage in a warm orange glow, Harold picked up the nose cone he'd carved and held it to the light. It was smooth, balanced, imperfect, but beautiful. Like him. He didn't speak aloud this time. He didn't need to. The work was its own language. And in that language, something was changing. Something deep. A quiet promise echoing through time and metal and memory. "I'm still building." The buzzing fluorescent lights in the doctor's office hummed above Harold's head like an interrogation lamp. He hated these checkups. Hated the way they made him feel like a malfunctioning appliance, something old and off warranty that people poked and prodded but didn't really expect to fix. The nurse had already left him sitting half-dressed on the padded exam table, his feet dangling like a child's. He studied the framed poster of a smiling older couple on bicycles with the cheerful caption, "Aging is living, differently." It made him want to spit. The door opened with a soft knock, and in came Dr. Harris, clipboard in hand, mid-30s, too handsome for his own good. He was the kind of man who called everyone "buddy" and used apps to count his steps. Harold didn't dislike him personally. He just disliked what he represented, youth, momentum, the unstated assumption that Harold should be grateful just to be standing. "Well," Harris said, scanning the chart, "your blood pressure's decent, cholesterol could be better. How's the arthritis in your hands?" Harold flexed his fingers, the joints stiff and swollen. Like a pair of rusty hinges. Harris gave a sympathetic smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "Let's talk about being realistic, Harold. I know you've been out in that garage a lot. Your daughter-in-law called, she's concerned." Said you're lifting tools you shouldn't, working late. Harold's jaw tightened. He didn't like that Sandra had called behind his back. I'm building something. That's not illegal, is it? No, Harris said slowly, but you need to be careful. At your age, a fall could mean permanent mobility loss. I've seen it happen. You're still independent, which is great, but I'd hate to see that change because of a bad choice. Harold stared at him. And what would you have me do? Sit in the lazy boy until my expiration date? Harris hesitated. I'm just saying, slow down. Know your limits. There's nothing wrong with aging gracefully. Harold snorted. Nothing graceful about giving up. On the drive home, his fingers throbbed against the steering wheel. The words replayed like static in his mind: slow down, be realistic, aging gracefully. What did that even mean? That he should fade away quietly. Be a good old man, wait politely for the end. The radio was tuned low, background noise to drown out his thoughts, when a podcast host's voice caught his attention. You're listening to The Future Is Now, and we're back with another clip from Elon Musk's latest keynote. Here's Musk on why SpaceX kept pushing after multiple rocket failures. The audio crackled, then Elon's voice came through, calm and certain. If you quit after failure, you've just guaranteed the failure was permanent. The only way forward is through. You keep testing, keep breaking, keep learning. Harold turned the volume up. Elon continued, we had 3 rockets explode before we landed one. People called us crazy. But failure isn't the enemy. Stagnation is. Harold gripped the steering wheel tighter. Failure isn't the enemy. Stagnation is. That line landed in his gut like a punch. Because he'd been stagnant for years. Since Mary died. Since David drifted away. Since his hands started failing him. He'd been sitting still while the world sped on, pretending he didn't care. But he did. He cared deeply. And he wasn't ready to let go. When he got home, he shuffled past the answering machine blinking with a new message. He ignored it. Instead, he walked straight to the garage. The place smelled like sawdust and possibility. The rocket's midsection was coming together. The new carbon fiber fins gleamed under the work light. But something else caught his eye, a piece of paper on the floor. It was a photograph, slipped from one of the old notebooks. He picked it up. It showed a much younger Harold, maybe 40, kneeling beside David, who wore a makeshift astronaut helmet made from a plastic salad bowl and duct tape. They were both laughing, their hands covered in grease and glue. Behind them, the rocket frame loomed like a monument to ambition. Harold traced his finger across the photo, across David's boyish grin. When had that stopped? When had laughter turned into silence? He sat down heavily on the stool, the photo trembling in his hand. That night, the arthritis in his fingers kept him awake. He couldn't hold a wrench without pain. Even turning a screwdriver was slow and clumsy. But he kept going. He rigged a clamp to hold pieces in place. Swapped out manual tools for electric ones. Found ways to work around his limits. Not because he was trying to prove something to the doctor. But because he wasn't done yet. A few days later, he ventured into the local hardware store for the first time in months. As he walked the aisles slowly, searching for a specific gauge of wire, he felt eyes on him. A voice called out from behind the plumbing section. Hey, Mr. Whitman. You building a walker or a weapon? It was Jake Morris, a mechanic's son who used to mow Harold's lawn back in the 90s. Now in his 40s, Jake had that smug air of someone who'd stopped trying and wanted everyone else to do the same. Harold raised an eyebrow. I'm building a rocket. Jake laughed too loudly. Still chasing NASA dreams? Aren't you a little old for liftoff? Another man chuckled nearby. Clamps, wire cutters, sanders, an old soldering iron that sparked like it had a grudge, it all came alive again. And so did he. The rocket was nearly complete in structure. He had the core tubing assembled, the carbon fiber fins affixed and aligned. His design was smaller than the original, scaled down for practicality, but the vision hadn't shrunk. If anything, it had grown. This rocket wasn't about height or altitude anymore. It was about resurrection. One morning, while adjusting the guidance fins, he heard the crunch of gravel outside. Tires. A car. Then a voice, tentative, uncertain, called out, "Dad." Harold froze. His heart, which had grown used to disappointment, skipped like a scratched record. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked to the garage door, pulling it open with a slow breath. There stood David. Same eyes, a bit more tired. Same shoulders, but stooped now with adulthood and responsibility. His face was thinner, his beard fuller. His expression unreadable. "I got your email," David said. "Didn't know if I should come." Harold blinked. "But you did." David looked past him, into the garage. "You really building it again?" Harold nodded. "Not exactly the same. But yeah. Something close." There was a pause. Then David took a step forward. "Can I see it?" They stood side by side under the glow of the single overhead bulb. David walked slowly around the rocket frame, fingers trailing just above the surface, not quite touching. "Looks better than it ever did back then," he said. "It does," Harold agreed. "Because I've got less time now. Can't afford to make the same mistakes twice." David nodded, but said nothing. Harold cleared his throat. "I found that picture. You with the helmet. Remember?" David smiled faintly. "Yeah. I wore that thing for weeks. Thought I was gonna be the first kid on Mars." "You might have been," Harold said. "If I'd kept showing up." Another pause. Then David said quietly, "You disappeared after Mom died." "Not physically. But I'd call, and it was like, the man on the other end of the line wasn't the same guy I built rockets with." Harold nodded. "He wasn't. He gave up." "Why?" "Because everything I'd built didn't save her. So I figured, what's the point of building anything?" David turned to look at him. "You could have built a bridge. To me. I was right there." The word sliced. Not in cruelty, but in truth. Harold looked down. "I didn't know how." "You taught me how to solder a flight computer at 9 years old," David said. "You can't tell me you didn't know how to talk to your own son." Silence settled between them. The kind only decades of missed conversations can create. Then Harold said, "I'm sorry. For every time I said later and didn't mean it." David's face softened. "I'm sorry too. I should have pushed harder. I let you drift." They stood in that silence, then David reached out and finally touched the rocket. "You're really gonna launch it?" Harold smirked. "If I can get the telemetry working. Might be the first backyard rocket tracked by a 72-year-old with arthritis." David chuckled. "You need help?" The question landed like an answered prayer. Harold didn't hide the smile. "Yeah. I do." That afternoon, they worked side by side like no time had passed. David asked questions. Harold explained. They argued about voltage limits. They laughed at the old logo still pinned to the wall. And somewhere between the wiring and the sanding, a bridge began to rebuild. They ordered pizza that night, grease-stained box resting on the workbench, the rocket standing tall beside them like a third member of the conversation. "You know," David said between bites, "I've been following Elon's work for years. SpaceX, Tesla, all of it. His whole idea of reusable rockets. It's not just smart, it's poetic." Harold nodded. "Like getting another shot after burning up." "Exactly. David wiped his hands. You think maybe we're reusable too? Harold looked at his son, older now, but not unreachable, and said, I think maybe we were always meant to be. The next morning, Harold woke before dawn. The pain in his hands was worse than usual. But he ignored it. Not because it didn't matter. But because what he was building mattered more. He opened the garage door and let the early morning air flood in, crisp and cold, smelling of dew and dry leaves. The rocket gleamed in the gray light. And behind it, the first rays of sunlight poured in like hope incarnate. David arrived an hour later, coffee in hand, laptop under one arm. I mocked up a basic altimeter readout, he said. Turns out I work in a startup full of Elon wannabes. Some of it rubs off. Over the next few days, they refined the design, added telemetry, improved fuel efficiency, replaced Harold's old ignition system with a programmable one. It was no longer just Harold's rocket. It was theirs. Late one night, after David had gone home and Harold was alone in the garage again, he sat with the old notebook in his lap. He flipped through the pages, notes from 1984, sketches of rocket stages, lists of parts and prices long outdated. Then he reached the back, where a folded piece of paper lay tucked. He opened it. A letter. In Mary's handwriting. Dated November 7, 1984. Harold, I hope you and David finish the rocket. He lights up when he talks about it. You don't see it, but he looks at you like you hang the stars. Please don't stop building with him. He'll remember it for the rest of his life. And so will you. Harold pressed the paper to his chest. For a moment, he didn't move. Just sat there in the soft hum of the garage, the rocket beside him, the letter in his heart, the past and the present converging. The garage wasn't just facing the backyard anymore. It was facing the stars. They chose the date together, October 14th. It was arbitrary on the surface, just 2.5 weeks away, but Harold knew it meant more than that. It would have been Mary's birthday. He didn't tell David right away. He just let the date settle in the air like dust floating through sunlight, quiet and warm and filled with a history that didn't need to be explained. The goal was modest: get the rocket airborne, keep it stable, track its flight, and land it safely with a chute system Harold had rigged out of nylon and fishing line. No explosions, no drama, just a clean launch and a soft return, something that symbolized a life that had burned but not ended. Something reusable. The backyard was too small, obviously. The trees alone would rip the fins off on ascent. So they contacted the county's amateur rocketry group, Midstate Skybound, and reserved space at an open field just outside town. It was mostly hobbyists, high schoolers, retired engineers, a few fathers and sons. When Harold called, the club president, a woman named Lynn with a voice like gravel and cigarettes, said, "You're Harold Whitman? The guy building the old school hybrid?" "Yeah, we've been following your posts. Everyone's curious. You got quite the fan base, old man." Harold laughed and replied, "Then I'd better not blow it up." The final 2 weeks were a blur of troubleshooting and anticipation. The control board failed on Tuesday. They rewired it. The igniter didn't fire properly on Thursday. David sourced a new one from a friend in town. Then, the day before the launch, Harold couldn't sleep. The pain in his hands flared worse than usual, making even the act of buttoning his shirt feel like surgery. He sat at the kitchen table at 4 a.m., watching an old SpaceX video on his tablet, Falcon 9's first successful landing on a drone ship. The rocket touched down with impossible precision, smoke curling around its base like it had just walked through fire and lived to tell about it. Then came Elon's voice, recorded later, answering a question at a conference. "We didn't succeed because we were smarter," Elon said. "We succeeded because we were too stubborn to stop trying." Harold closed his eyes. He understood that now. It wasn't about talent or youth or energy. It was about showing up again. After the crash. After the silence. After the years that said you were done. When David arrived that morning, Harold had already loaded the rocket, now named Star Launch Reignite, into the back of the pickup, wrapped in blankets and strapped tight. David jumped into the passenger seat, holding coffee in both hands, and gave a mock salute. "Commander Whitman, are we go for launch?" Harold smirked. "We are go. Weather clear, payload ready, heart pounding like hell." They arrived at the launch site just after sunrise. The field was vast, golden with fall grass and dotted with people setting up launch pads and tents. A banner read, "Midstate Skybound, where dreams take flight." David helped unload the rocket while Harold checked the wind. It was steady but light, ideal. Other rocketeers passed by, nodding in recognition. One teenage girl stopped and said, "Are you the guy who posted about this on the forum?" Harold nodded. She looked at the rocket, eyes wide. "That's beautiful. Did you 3D print the nozzle?" "Nope," Harold said. "Hand filed. Took 4 hours and 2 blisters." She grinned. "That's awesome." By mid-morning, a crowd had gathered near their launch station. Not a massive crowd, maybe 50 people, but enough to make Harold's knees ache and his mouth go dry. Public speaking hadn't been part of the plan. But Lynn walked up, clipboard in hand, and said, "Everyone's been asking about your build. Mind saying a few words before we launch?" Harold looked to David, who gave a subtle nod. So he stepped up beside the launch pad, cleared his throat, and faced the crowd. "This rocket," he began, "was supposed to fly almost 40 years ago. Back then, my son and I started building it together. Life got in the way. I put it off. Eventually, I gave up on more than just the rocket." He paused, took a breath. "But a few weeks ago, I saw Elon Musk land a Falcon 9 rocket on a floating barge. I remembered what it felt like to believe in impossible things. So I came back to the garage. And I built again. Not because I thought I'd break records. But because I needed to prove to myself, and maybe to others, that it's never too late to reignite." There was silence for a moment. Then applause, steady, warm, real. David came to his side. They ran the final pre-launch checks together. Telemetry online. Igniter armed. Stabilizer fins calibrated. The rocket stood 6 feet tall, sleek and lean, painted white with a single red stripe spiraling around its body. David had insisted on including the old hand-drawn logo, and Harold had agreed. There it was, right below the nose cone, the crooked star in a circle, childish and perfect. "Ready?" David asked. "As I'll ever be," Harold said. They stepped back behind the safety barrier. Lynn counted down over the loudspeaker. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, launch. The ignition popped. The engine roared. And the rocket leapt. Not staggered. Not sputtering. It leapt. Straight, fast, clean. Cheers erupted. Harold's heart rose with it, chest tight, eyes tracking the silver streak as it arced into the sky. A trail of smoke followed, and then, at apogee, the parachute deployed. The rocket drifted back down, slow and steady, like it was savoring the moment. It landed softly in the grass a few hundred feet away. David ran to retrieve it. When he returned, grinning like a boy again, the crowd applauded once more. Harold took the rocket in his hands. It was warm from flight, but intact. Reusable. He looked up at the sky, endless, open, and whispered, "Thank you, Mary." Later, as they packed up, David handed him a phone. "Want to see this?" Someone had posted the launch video online. Already, it had thousands of views. The title read, 72-year-old man launches rocket he designed in 1984. A second chance that soared. Comments flooded in. "This is what I needed today." Tears. Literal tears. I'm 67 and I just signed up for an online course in robotics. Let's go. Harold stared at the screen, then at David. Think anyone ever says that about accountants? David laughed. I doubt it. They drove home in silence for a while. Not heavy silence. Comfortable. Full. As they pulled into the driveway, Harold turned off the ignition but didn't get out. He looked at his son. We're not done, are we? David shook his head. Not even close. That night, after David had left and the garage was quiet again, Harold rolled out a new sheet of paper across the workbench. The rocket stood beside him, a little scorched but undamaged. He began to sketch. Not repairs. Improvements. A better stabilizer. A stronger chute system. He wasn't rebuilding anymore. He was advancing. Iterating. Like SpaceX. Like Elon. He chuckled to himself. Still building. And from the far end of the quiet house, he could almost hear Mary's voice, soft and proud. Keep going, Harold. You were never too old. Just waiting to fly. The morning after the launch felt like waking up after a dream so vivid it left footprints in your chest. Harold stepped out onto his porch just as the sun began to climb, golden and unhurried, warming the dew-drenched lawn. The air smelled of wood smoke and distant leaves. In his garage, the rocket stood proudly upright, soot-smudged but upright, more monument than machine now, at least to him. He sat beside it on his stool and reached out to run his fingers over the fins. They were cool, still slightly rough to the touch from where they'd scraped the grass on landing. You did good, he whispered, as if the thing could hear. And maybe it could, in its own way. Not through science, but through memory. Through meaning. The launch had changed something, not just in the world outside, but in him. For weeks, the build had filled the silence. Now, the silence felt like potential. Space waiting to be filled again. A message notification pinged on his phone, jarring him from his thoughts. It was from Lynn, the Rocketry Club president. You got some attention, the message read. Check your email. Harold shuffled inside, booting up his old desktop that sounded like a jet engine on takeoff. It took a full 5 minutes to get to his inbox, and there it was, an email from a name he didn't recognize. The subject line read, from the team at SpaceX. His heart skipped. He clicked. The email was short, direct, and almost unbelievable. Mr. Whitman, we came across the video of your recent rocket launch. Several of us here were moved, not only by your technical persistence but by the story behind it. Elon often speaks about reusable systems and not giving up after failure. Your story embodies that philosophy. If you're interested, we'd like to invite you to visit our facility in Boca Chica. Tour the starbase. See what the next frontier looks like. We think you'll find it familiar. It was signed by a PR liaison, but the tone felt real. No boilerplate language. Just an invitation that hit him right between the ribs. He read it again, then again, half expecting the screen to flicker and vanish, like it was a mirage. But it stayed. Boca Chica, he said aloud, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. Texas. That evening, David came over, still riding the adrenaline from the launch. Harold printed the email and handed it to him in silence. David scanned it quickly, then looked up, eyebrows high. You're kidding. Wish I was. Dad, this is wild. I know. You're gonna go, right? Harold hesitated. I don't know. That's a long trip. Expensive. They said they'd cover travel. And accommodations. Still what? David stepped closer. This isn't just about rockets anymore. You inspired people. Look at the video, over 500,000 views now. People are sharing it on forums, tech blogs, even Facebook groups for veterans and retirees. They're calling you the Garage Engineer of the Year. That sounds ridiculous, Harold muttered, embarrassed. It's not. It's powerful. You made something fly again, not just your rocket. Yourself. Others. People are talking about second chances because of you. You're not done, Dad. You're just at the next stage. That night, Harold barely slept. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the desert skies of Texas, about rockets the size of buildings and flames that could light the night like a second sun. Could he really go? Could a man who hadn't flown on a plane since the 90s walk into the future and not feel like a ghost? At dawn, he emailed SpaceX back. Yes. I'd be honored. Within hours, arrangements were made. A week later, he found himself boarding a plane to Brownsville, Texas, his hands trembling not with pain, but with anticipation. He wore a denim jacket that Mary had patched years ago, and in his pocket, he carried the folded photo of him and David, the old one, with the salad bowl helmet and the rocket skeleton in the background. Just before takeoff, the pilot announced, "Today's flight path will take us along the Gulf Coast. Weather is clear, skies are open." Harold smiled at that. Clear skies. Open. When he landed, a young man from the SpaceX team named Victor greeted him with a handshake firm enough to crack stone. "Mr. Whitman, it's an honor. We're all big fans." "Please," Harold said, "just Harold." The starbase was unlike anything Harold had ever seen. Massive towers, launch pads, fuel tanks, and rocket prototypes that looked like chrome skyscrapers waiting to pierce the sky. The air smelled like salt and fuel and metal. It wasn't science fiction, it was happening, here, now. Victor led him through the compound, explaining the iterative process Elon had pioneered: design, test, explode, redesign, fly again. Fail forward. Reuse. "We treat rockets like software now," Victor said. "Always updating, always improving. No version is final. That's the beauty of it." Harold nodded, understanding more than most would. The idea that failure wasn't a death sentence, it was a draft. An invitation to revise. At one hangar, Harold met engineers who'd seen his video. One woman, older than the others, maybe in her 50s, said, "You reminded me why I got into this. My dad used to take me to launches when I was a kid. Somewhere along the way, I forgot how it felt. Your story brought it back." In the mission control room, he sat in a chair marked "Guest," staring at monitors filled with data he mostly understood and lights blinking like Morse code. They showed him a test launch, just a small suborbital hop, but the roar of the engine still shook the windows. Harold watched the rocket rise, balance itself, then settle again with precision. Not perfect, but enough. And he thought, this is what second chances look like when you stop waiting for someone to hand them to you. Before he left, Victor gave him a gift. A small plaque, black metal with silver lettering. It read, "To Harold Whitman, for reminding us that the sky has no age limit." On the flight home, Harold held it in his lap the whole way. He didn't cry. But he didn't stop smiling, either. When he got back, the garage felt different. Not smaller, but transformed. It wasn't just a workspace now, it was a portal. A space where the past, present, and future overlapped. He placed the plaque above the workbench, just below the old hand-drawn logo. Then he rolled out another blueprint. Bigger this time. More ambitious. And he picked up a pencil. The cold November wind rattled the windows as Harold hunched over the workbench, pencil in hand, sketching like he used to decades ago, before the arthritis, before the silence. The rocket launch, the SpaceX visit, the comments from strangers online, all of it had stirred something awake in him. Not just pride or nostalgia, but urgency. A pulse. There was time left. Not much. But enough. And now, he knew what he wanted to do with it. Build again. But not a replica of the past. Something new. Something bigger. Not just physically, but symbolically. A rocket with real thrust, altitude, telemetry, parachutes, and this time, maybe a purpose beyond the launch. Something that could be part of a national competition. Maybe even inspire kids, or veterans, or anyone who thought their last good idea was behind them. He had the outline drawn before the sun came up. He labeled it Reignite 2 in the top right corner of the graph paper, the lines sharper, the goals clearer. Twin stage. Advanced recovery system. Integrated camera. And then, on a whim, he added something he'd never done before, a small payload bay. A compartment that could carry something meaningful. Not data. Not sensors. But symbols. Stories. Messages from people who, like him, had felt forgotten and grounded too long. He didn't know yet what would go in it. He just knew there had to be something. This rocket wouldn't just fly. It would carry voices. 2 days later, he made a simple post online, I'm building a new rocket. Reignite 2. This one has a payload bay, and I want to fill it with things that matter. If you've ever felt like it was too late to start again, send me your story. I'll launch it. The responses came within hours. Then hundreds. Then thousands. Emails, comments, videos, letters. From all over the country. One woman from Iowa sent a poem she wrote at age 70 after leaving an abusive marriage. A retired coal miner in West Virginia sent a photo of his hands, once broken and calloused, now making miniature trains from scrap metal. A former teacher from Oregon sent a letter she'd written but never mailed to her estranged daughter. A Vietnam veteran sent a dog tag from a fallen friend. And one little boy from Nebraska sent a crayon drawing of his grandfather with the words, he's a rocket too. Harold read every submission, printing some, laminating others, packing each one carefully in plastic sleeves. David came by with a thermal casing designed to withstand the launch heat. Payload integrity is key, he said with a grin. We're not losing a single memory to altitude. As they worked, Harold looked at his son. You know what this really is? David shrugged. A fire hazard? Harold chuckled. It's a message in a bottle. From the ground to the sky. Proof that we're still here. That we still dream. Construction of Reignite 2 began in early December. It was taller than the first by a full foot, with a broader base for stability and longer fins for balance. The engine was more sophisticated too, a composite fuel blend David sourced through one of his tech connections. They printed parts on a borrowed 3D printer, welded custom stabilizer rings in Harold's garage, and tested recovery systems in the backyard using a rigged-up potato cannon and a dummy weight. Neighbors started noticing. Some asked if they were opening a junkyard. Others dropped by to offer coffee, cookies, or silent thumbs up. One man from 3 blocks down, someone Harold had never met, left a folded note in his mailbox. It read, I haven't built anything in 30 years. Watching you reminded me that I can. Thank you. Harold kept that note in his shirt pocket. Close to the heart. Just before Christmas, he and David did a dry run at the field, checking the new stabilizer program. The software failed on the 3rd test. David swore under his breath. It's okay, Harold said, calming him. We'll figure it out. I just want it to work. You've got people counting on this now. That's what makes it worth doing. Back at the garage, they worked late into the night, side by side, soldering circuits, reprogramming chips, testing recovery motors. It felt like 1984 again, minus the cassette tapes and Harold's mullet. At one point, David looked up from the code. You realize you've created a kind of movement, right? People are calling this the Reignite Project. There's even a subreddit. Harold laughed. What the hell is a subreddit? Never mind. But he explained anyway. How people were sharing their launch moments, photos, videos, timelines. A woman in Florida had started painting again at 68. A man in Arizona began learning robotics. One couple in Michigan wrote, "We always wanted to adopt." This rocket reminded us we're not too late. Harold swallowed the lump in his throat. "I just wanted to fly something." "And you did," David said. "But more than that, you gave other people permission to fly too." They set the new launch date for February 3rd. The anniversary of the first Reignite flight. A full year since Harold had started walking again. A full year since he stopped fading and began reigniting. On New Year's Eve, while others were celebrating with champagne and countdowns, Harold sat in the garage, looking at the sealed payload bay. Inside were 127 stories, each one a life that had refused to go quietly. He closed the hatch slowly, like tucking a child into bed, and whispered, "Let's get you home." 2 days later, a package arrived. It was from SpaceX. Inside was a handwritten card. "Harold, we heard about Reignite too. Keep building. Keep proving the impossible isn't age-bound. Let us know when you're ready to go orbital." It was signed, DM. No title. Just initials. Harold stared at the card for a long moment, then looked at David, who had just walked in. He wrote back. "Who?" "Elon." David raised an eyebrow. "Seriously?" "Seriously." Then he smiled. "Guess I better make sure this one doesn't blow up." They laughed, but the pressure was real. This rocket wasn't just a project anymore. It was a promise. Not to strangers. To themselves. To anyone who had sat in a quiet house thinking it was too late. February came fast. The days leading up to the launch were filled with final tests, calibration, press inquiries, and a growing crowd of supporters planning to attend. Some were locals. Others were flying in. One woman was driving all the way from Colorado. "I was one of the first to send a message," she'd written. "I want to see it fly." As the sun rose on launch day, Harold stood in the field once again. Same boots. Same flannel. But something inside him was different. He wasn't afraid of failing anymore. Because he'd already proven what mattered, he got up. He showed up. He built again. And now it was time to send those stories skyward. The morning mist hung low over the field, curling like breath over cold soil, silent and still. February 3rd had arrived, and with it, a hush that felt sacred. Not fear. Not doubt. But reverence. A kind of stillness that happens just before something important. Harold stood at the edge of the launch zone, his hands in his coat pockets, staring at Reignite 2. It stood tall, 7 feet of sleek composite and memory, painted silver and crimson, the colors chosen by David to represent courage and transformation. "Silver for age, red for fire," he'd said. The rocket shimmered faintly under the breaking dawn. It was time. The field had changed since last year. There were now folding chairs lined up in tidy rows, a podium, speakers, cameras on tripods. People milled around in winter jackets, boots crunching over frost-covered grass, clutching coffee cups, murmuring softly to each other. Some were reporters. Others were strangers who felt like family. One woman, thin, silver-haired, wearing a knit scarf and a NASA pin, approached Harold slowly. "I'm Denise," she said. "My husband's letter is in there." Harold nodded. "I remember. Vietnam pilot. Wrote about his regrets. He passed last week," she said, voice wavering but firm. "But he knew it was going up. Thank you for giving him that." Harold touched her arm. "Thank you for trusting me with it." Nearby, David was setting up the telemetry table, checking wind speed, data feed, and ignition parameters. A laptop screen flickered with diagnostic readouts, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "We're green across the board," he said without looking up. "Final checklist ready." Harold nodded, breathing deep, letting the cold fill his lungs and sharpen his mind. At 9:42 a.m., Lynn stepped to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said into the mic, her usual gruffness softened by emotion, "today isn't just a rocket launch. It's a story launch. Inside that rocket are 127 pieces of people's lives, words, photos, memories, things that matter. They're going to touch the sky today because someone decided that 72 wasn't the end of the road, it was the launch pad." She paused. "Please welcome the man who reminded us what second chances look like. Harold Whitman." Applause rose gently, then swelled, like a wave building under sunlight. Harold stepped forward, slower than he used to, but steadier than ever. He looked out at the crowd. So many faces. Young and old. Weathered and smooth. A boy on his father's shoulders. An elderly man in a wheelchair. Journalists scribbling notes. Strangers crying. "I don't have a speech," he began. "I'm not a politician or a preacher. I'm just a man who forgot he could still build something." He paused, heart full. "This rocket isn't about me. It's about all of you. Every message inside it is proof that we're not done. Not washed up. Not irrelevant. We're just waiting for someone to say, 'Go ahead. Build it. Launch it. Start again.'" He looked at the rocket. "Well, here's our answer." With David beside him, they began the final countdown together. 10, the crowd joined in. 9. 8. 7, Harold's fingers hovered over the ignition switch. 6. 5. 4, he felt his chest tighten, not with fear, but awe. 3. 2. 1. Launch. The rocket surged upward with a roar that thundered across the valley. It wasn't the biggest rocket on Earth. But at that moment, it was everything. A streak of silver-red light cutting through a perfect blue sky, trailing smoke and hope and the prayers of people who once believed they were too old to matter. It climbed higher than the first. Almost twice as high. The crowd craned upward, shielding eyes, breath caught. Then, at apogee, the hatch blew open. The payload bay released a cluster of streamers and flags, each attached to a capsule containing the stories. Bright colors danced in the wind, like birds freed from cages. And then came the parachutes. White, flawless, blooming against the sky. The rocket descended slowly, the payloads fluttering gently in tandem. Cheers erupted. People hugged. Some wept. David caught the descent on video, laughing like a kid again. Harold just watched. Silent. Overwhelmed. When the rocket touched down, upright, balanced, proud, it was met with applause and reverence. A soft landing. Perfectly reusable. They carried it back to the staging area like a returning hero. Reporters swarmed, asking questions, flashing cameras. Harold answered as best he could, but his eyes kept drifting back to the sky. As if something still hung there. Maybe it did. That evening, after the crowd had gone and the field was quiet again, Harold and David sat in the bed of the pickup, watching the sun set behind the tree line. "You did it," David said. "No," Harold replied. "We did it. I mean really. You launched a national moment. That hashtag #ReigniteRocket, has over 1 million mentions now. Elon tweeted it, you know." "He did?" "Yeah. Just one word, respect." Harold smiled. "That's enough for me." They sat in silence for a while. Then Harold asked, "What happens next?" David looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we've launched. Twice. We've told the stories. Built the rockets. So, now what? David leaned back, folding his arms behind his head. Now we scale. Scale? Yeah. We build a kit. A simple model. Something affordable. We let people build their own reignite rockets. Put their own stories inside. Launch them with their grandkids. In their backyards. In schools. Senior centers. VFW halls. Everywhere. Harold blinked. You want to open source my garage? David grinned. Why not? We've got something that works. Let's share it. Over the next few weeks, they did exactly that. David created a website, simple and clean, reigniterocket.org. It offered free blueprints, launch safety tips, payload guides. A forum for stories. A gallery for launches. Harold recorded a welcome video. Just him, sitting at his workbench, talking like a friend. If you're seeing this, he said, you're not too late. You've still got time to build something. Whether it flies or not, doesn't matter. What matters is that you remember, there's still fire in you. So light the fuse. In a matter of months, there were reignite launches in all 50 states. A veterans group in Kentucky launched a rocket filled with medals and goodbye letters. A Girl Scout troop in Oregon launched one with wishes written on ribbon. A retirement home in Florida built 2 rockets, one named, Still Kicking, the other, Why Not? Harold watched each video, each picture, each post with a mix of awe and disbelief. One evening, he received a package. Inside was a rocket fin, scorched but intact, painted navy blue. A note read, My father built this with me before he passed. We launched it on his 80th birthday. He said, This is the best day of my life. Thank you. Harold held the fin for a long time. Then mounted it on the garage wall. Right above the plaque from SpaceX. The garage was full now. Not with clutter, but legacy. And in that legacy, Harold finally saw it clearly, he hadn't built a rocket. He'd built a reason. And maybe, just maybe, that reason would outlive him. The call came in the middle of a quiet Thursday morning. Harold had just finished sanding a new nose cone, ash wood, solid and smooth, and was brushing sawdust off his flannel when the phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, and for a moment, he hesitated. Then he remembered what he always told others now, say yes before you talk yourself out of it. He answered. Harold Whitman. The voice on the other end was young, clear, and confident. This is Claire Alvarez. I'm a producer with Horizons, the documentary division at National Public Broadcasting. Harold wiped his hands on a towel. I don't watch much TV anymore. Claire chuckled. That's okay. But a lot of people do. And your story's spreading far beyond rockets and Reddit forums. We'd like to do a full episode on the Reignite project, your journey, the launches, the stories you've carried. We believe it's one of the most inspiring things happening in America right now. Harold blinked. You think people want to watch an old man tinkering in his garage? We think people want to see what hope looks like after 70, she said. They want to see someone who defies gravity, not just with rockets, but with belief. He didn't answer right away. Something inside him tightened, part fear, part wonder. All right, he said finally. Come on over. 2 weeks later, the crew arrived. 4 people with cameras, microphones, lighting rigs, and questions. Claire led them with a calm, respectful energy, always explaining what they were doing, always asking Harold if he was comfortable. Just be yourself, she said. You're the reason we're here. David took time off work to help set up. He helped Harold clean the garage, not to sterilize it, but to make it readable. They left the scorch-marked fins on the shelf, the engine parts on the bench, the old photo of Mary taped to the corkboard. People need to see the real thing, David said. Not the polished version. The interview began in the backyard, with the late winter sun slanting through the bare trees. Harold sat in his work jacket, the original Reignite rocket beside him like a walking cane that had taken him to the stars. "So, tell us," Claire began, "how did this all start?" Harold paused. "You want the truth or the dramatic version?" "Whatever you tell your grandchild." He looked at the rocket. "It started because I realized I was disappearing. My wife had passed. My health was going. My world got small. I thought maybe I'd already lived the best parts. And what changed that?" "A rocket," he said. "Well, not just a rocket. A video. Elon Musk landing that Falcon 9 on a drone ship. Something about it punched right through the fog. It said, 'Try again.' Not because you're guaranteed success, but because trying again is the only thing that still matters." Over the next few days, they filmed everything, him working at the bench, walking through the neighborhood with David, scrolling through Reignite submissions on the website, responding to emails from strangers. They captured his pauses, his jokes, even the way he rubbed his aching hands before picking up a tool. "We want to show the whole picture," Claire said. "Not just the triumphant moments, but the real ones. The effort. The ache. The humanity." One evening, they asked if he'd visit the local high school's science club, where students were building their first Reignite rocket. Harold agreed. He hadn't been in a high school in over 40 years. When he walked into the classroom, the room fell silent. Then one kid, maybe 16, said, "Is that the Harold Whitman?" Harold chuckled. "Depends. Is he still stubborn and tired and full of sawdust?" They laughed. The students gathered around, showing him their design, a slightly modified Reignite build with a side-mounted GoPro and a custom message bay. One girl said, "We're launching with letters to our future selves. 10 years from now, we're gonna read them." "Smart," Harold said. "Build something for the future, but launch it now." The teacher, Mr. Reynolds, pulled Harold aside. "These kids weren't this excited about anything until your video hit. Some of them didn't even think about engineering as an option before this." Harold swallowed. "I didn't expect all this." "That's the thing about sparks," the teacher said. "You don't get to decide how far they spread." On the last day of filming, Claire asked to record a final message. "Just something direct," she said. "A camera. You. Speak to the people watching." Harold sat on a stool in his garage, the plaque from SpaceX behind him, the Reignite 2 rocket beside him, and the wall filled with photos, drawings, and letters from people around the world. The camera light blinked red. "If you're watching this," he said slowly, "I want you to know something. Age isn't the end. It's a stage. A new one. Nobody told me that. I thought once I retired, once my wife passed, once my hands started hurting, that was it. My best days were gone. But here's the truth, I just stopped trying. That's all. I didn't run out of time. I ran out of belief." He paused, glancing at the rocket. "Building that first rocket again, after 30 years, it didn't fix my life. But it gave me a reason to keep going. And from that, everything changed. My son came back into my life. Strangers became friends. People started building things, small things, big things, things that mattered." He leaned forward slightly. "So if you're sitting there, thinking you missed your shot, I'm here to tell you, there's no such thing. There's just now. That's all you ever get. And it's enough. Pick up a tool. Call someone. Write a letter. Plant something. Build something. Even if it fails. Especially if it fails. Because failure means you tried. And trying means you're still alive." He looked into the lens. "I'm 73. And I just got started." The episode aired on a Sunday evening in May. By Monday, the Reignite website had crashed from traffic. News outlets picked it up. Schools reached out. Community centers asked for kits. A major nonprofit offered funding for a national program. A museum called, asking for the original Reignite rocket to be displayed next to the Apollo exhibits, a different kind of American dream, they called it. Harold watched it all unfold with a strange calm. The fame wasn't the fuel. It never had been. The rocket was the point. The build. The risk. The story. The movement wasn't about him. He was just the ignition switch. And now it was lit. Everywhere. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? It was a hot morning in early June when the letter arrived, thicker than usual, hand-addressed, sealed with real wax. Unusual in a world where everything came digital. Harold found it sitting neatly atop the day's mail, bills, a tool catalog, and a circular from the hardware store. But this one stood out like a lighthouse in fog. The envelope was heavy, ivory-colored, no return address. He turned it over in his hands, sensing something more than paper inside. He sat down at the kitchen table, careful, deliberate. He hadn't felt this kind of anticipation since his draft notice in '69. Slowly, he broke the seal. Inside was a single letter, printed on fine stationery, and a smaller envelope tucked within. He unfolded the letter and began to read. Dear Mr. Whitman, my name is Emily Kwan, and I work on special outreach projects for Elon Musk. I'm writing on behalf of Mr. Musk because something about your story struck him, not just your resilience, not just the rockets, but the reason behind them. The way you've turned your second chapter into a platform for others. Well, it's the kind of thing that doesn't go unnoticed around here. We're building a different kind of space program, not just with rockets, but with people. With ideas. With courage. And we'd like you to be part of something we're calling the Reusability Summit, a gathering of thinkers, builders, and pioneers who embody the spirit of doing more with what others call worn out. We're inviting engineers, artists, retirees, veterans, young prodigies, and yes, folks like you, whose stories challenge the very idea of exploration. You don't have to give a speech. Just be there. Represent what's possible when we refuse to go quietly. The summit takes place next month at Starbase. All travel and accommodations will be covered. If you're open to it, we'd love to send you a special flight pass enclosed. You'll be flying out with a few others, people whose lives you've already touched more than you know. Sincerely, Emily Kwan, Outreach Coordinator, SpaceX. Harold lowered the letter slowly. His heart was thudding, not with fear or pride, but that strange feeling of something beginning again. Again. He opened the smaller envelope. Inside was a black passcard, matte and minimal, with one word stamped in silver, Reignite. The rest of the day passed in a kind of quiet haze. He sat on the back porch, watching bees drift through the garden Mary had planted years ago, letting the sunlight touch his face, letting the weight of the invitation settle gently. David came by that evening, and Harold handed him the letter without a word. David read it twice, then looked up. You're going. Harold smiled. Didn't say I wasn't. You're not even nervous. Oh, I'm nervous, he said. I'm also 73 and have survived shrapnel, gallstones, IRS audits, and 2 marriages. I'll manage. David laughed. Good answer. They clinked mugs of root beer and sat in the fading dusk, a quiet between them filled with more than just air. It was respect. It was gratitude. It was the space between generations, finally bridged. When the day of the summit came, Harold found himself once again boarding a plane, this time feeling more prepared, more rooted. He wore his denim jacket, same as before, but under it was a crisp shirt with the Reignite logo embroidered on the chest. David had surprised him with it the night before. Figured you're official now, he'd said. At the gate, Harold noticed something unusual. People were staring. Not rudely, curiously. A young man in a NASA hoodie approached. "Are you Harold Whitman?" Harold nodded. "Yes. My mom's letter flew in your last rocket. She cried when she saw it land. Thank you for what you're doing." Harold swallowed the sudden emotion and nodded. "Tell her she's the reason I keep building." On the flight, he was seated next to a woman in her 40s who introduced herself as Bianca. "I teach engineering at a community college in Ohio," she said. "After your documentary aired, I started a Reignite chapter with my students. We've launched 5 rockets so far. Each one had a story in it." She smiled. "Your idea changed our curriculum." Harold chuckled. "I was just trying to find a reason to get out of bed." Well, it worked. The Reusability Summit at Starbase was like nothing Harold had ever experienced. Dozens of people from all walks of life gathered under massive white tents pitched beside the rocket yard. They wore everything from suits to coveralls. A blind sculptor from San Diego. A grandmother from Montana who 3D printed mobility aids. A father-son team who turned broken bicycles into solar-powered carts. The vibe was less conference, more family reunion for the creatively stubborn. When Elon Musk walked out to open the summit, there was no dramatic music, no spotlight, just him, a mic, and a plain t-shirt. "Reusability is not just about saving rockets," he said. "It's about saving ideas. People. Systems. Stories. What the world throws away, we reuse. Not because we're cheap, but because we believe in second chances. That's what keeps humanity going." He paused, then added, "There's someone here today who reminded me of that. A man who rebuilt his life using garage tools, memory, and grit. Harold Whitman, thank you." The crowd turned and applauded. Harold stood slowly, waving slightly, overwhelmed but steady. Elon walked over and shook his hand. "You lit a fuse," Elon said quietly. "And look what it started." Later, during a breakout session, Harold was seated at a table with 5 other attendees, each telling their story. One woman had survived cancer and now built adaptive toys for kids. A retired mechanic created kinetic sculptures from junkyard scraps. A former inmate taught woodworking to teenagers. Harold listened to each one, nodding, feeling something he hadn't expected, belonging. Not just admiration. Belonging. Like these were his people. Makers. Survivors. Dreamers who didn't know how to quit. That night, at the summit dinner, he sat beneath string lights eating brisket and cornbread with people who used words like thrust vectoring and regenerative design as casually as others talked about the weather. Claire from the documentary waved from a nearby table. David texted a photo of his daughter holding a Reignite rocket sticker, captioned, "She wants to be just like you." Harold looked up at the sky. The Texas stars were so bright, they made you believe again. Believe in height. In depth. In everything that couldn't be measured by years. As the night wound down, Elon took the stage again. "We're not going to Mars just to escape Earth," he said. "We're going because dreaming that big forces us to grow. We're going because every civilization needs its North Star. But we can't get there without people who know how to build again. People who don't give up. People like Harold." Then he turned to Harold, smiled, and said, "How would you feel about helping design a rocket kit for retirees?" The audience laughed. Then clapped. But Elon wasn't joking. And Harold, without missing a beat, replied, "Only if I get to name it." Elon raised an eyebrow. Deal. And that's how the Reignite X program was born. The garage felt different when Harold arrived back home, not emptier, exactly, but more alive. The plaque he'd received still hung on the wall, the Reignite inspiring tools still lined the bench, but now, there was a new mission, designing the Reignite X kit. He cleared the bench space, unrolled sheets of graph paper, and laid out every component they'd need: a mini fuselage, cloud-safe igniter, recovery parachute, payload capsule, instruction manual. The challenge was to make it simple enough for retirees with shaky hands, safe enough for a community center workshop, and inspiring enough to carry the same spark that set his own transformation in motion. He sketched a bold silhouette, sleek, friendly, approachable, and wrote at the top, Age-Proof 001. David joined him after dinner, dropping off new prototypes. "Look at these," he said, holding a tiny plastic engine mock-up. Snap-fit Phoenix micro-engine, safe, lightweight, non-combustible. "We can make it glow, not go boom." Harold grinned. "Fire in the name of safety. I like that." They began assembling parts. Harold sanded miniature fins, tested the payload hatch, and tested snap on wiring connectors that didn't need pliers. He tested the kit's manual with his arthritic hands, reading the instructions aloud. Step 1, attach fins firmly. Step 2, insert battery. His voice cracked, rattled, but kept going. There was a truth in doing this. He asked friends over to help test the prototypes: Eileen, who'd played piano for a generation of schoolchildren; Sam, who drove school buses till retirement; Janie, whose knees replaced her ambition 20 years ago. All struggled at first, instructions too small, parts slippery, but they gave feedback. Too precise. Make the grips bigger. The parts too fragile. Thicken the plastic. The manual. Use bigger font, clearer diagrams, encouraging language. If Harold can do it at 73, said Eileen with a laugh, so can I. Harold realized the kit wasn't just about making rockets. It was about building dignity. Inclusion. The idea that at any age, no matter the limitations, you can still create the extraordinary. After weeks of revisions, the kit was ready for a pilot test at the local senior center. He showed up with 10 kits and a team of volunteers, children from the local school's STEM club, to help with assembly. The senior center's big room buzzed, some with scooters, some with canes, some with just a bold curiosity in their eyes. Harold spoke gently, "Today, we're building a rocket, together. And when we launch it, we remember that we're still building, still capable." Fingers trembled, kids assisted, laughter and advice commingled. One woman had trepidation: "I've never done this before." Harold kneeled beside her. "You're doing it now. That's what matters, where you landed, not where you started." The rockets took shape, one by one. Then something extraordinary happened. They launched them in the parking lot, one after another, tiny but majestic, gliding upward on non-flame fuel, trailing safe smoke, each carrying a small keepsake. A dried flower, a handwritten line of poetry, a child's drawing. When they all returned intact, the room cheered. Some amateurs wiped away tears, others clasped their hands in wonder. The STEM club kids hoisted Harold's hands. He smelled coffee and nostalgia. He whispered, "We did that." Meanwhile, the documentary crew from Horizons had filmed it all: clips of Harold wiping down parts, older hands feathering the fins, rockets spiraling across blue sky. The footage stirred online again, and soon Reignite X kits were pre-ordered across 48 states. Community centers, schools, veteran groups, and retirement homes all placed requests. A non-profit offered to fund free kits for 500 rural senior centers. The Reignite website had a new page: Reignite X, Build Your Story. Harold stared at the first orders. Mrs. Navarro, 78, wants to launch a letter her grandson wrote. Mr. Leong, 84, wants to send up a key to the garden he never planted. He pressed his hand to the screen. It was no longer just kits. It was hope delivered piece by piece. Weeks later, he received a holographic-style message from Emily Kwan at SpaceX: "Harold, would you like to co-present Reignite X at the next big state science fair? Maybe show the students how kits launch real ideas, not just stunts." Harold's hands trembled but his heart did not. Yes, he typed, let's teach them that rockets are just dreams waiting to fly. The night before the fair, Harold stood in his garage, kit components spread before him under warm light. They were tiny but infinitely meaningful, plastic, foam, wires, tiny vessels for big stories. He closed his eyes, remembering how he first believed he was too old to matter, too used up to inspire. Now these kits were going to change lives. Teach new generations that value isn't measured in age or strength, but in willingness to build. When he arrived at the science fair, the applause felt different. Not for performance, but permission. He set up a demo, flanked by students mailing their messages into rocket pods. Families gathered around. He listened to a mother tell him, "My dad's doing this with me." And a girl say, "I want to be like you when I'm old." The fair got coverage, education boards wanted curriculum. And through it all, Harold stayed grounded. He was, still, a builder with hands that hurt, heart that hoped, and a refusal to stop flying. As he left the fair, David by his side, he said quietly, "We're just getting started." And maybe, he was right. The morning of the launch arrived like a fresh wind, clear skies and a sharp, promising chill that whispered of new beginnings. Harold woke early, the familiar ache in his knees reminding him of battles past but not stealing his excitement. Today was the culmination of months of work, the moment when the Reignite X kits would move from dreams on paper to rockets in the sky. He dressed carefully, pulling on his denim jacket, the one worn thin from years of garage tinkering, and tucked the black Reignite passcard in his shirt pocket. David was already at the kitchen table, eyes glued to the live stream setup on his laptop, fingers tapping out last-minute messages on social media. The small farmhouse smelled faintly of coffee and pine cleaner, the porch humming softly with early summer life. The launch site was a short drive south, at a community field not far from town, dotted with folding chairs and a scattering of tents. Harold arrived early, greeted by familiar faces, some of the retirees who'd helped build the kits, the local STEM club kids eager to see their work soar, and a few curious neighbors drawn by flyers and word of mouth. Emily Kwan was there, camera crew in tow, bustling with energy and purpose. "Ready to make history?" she asked, handing Harold a cup of water. He nodded, heart pounding not from fear but from a quiet, fierce pride. They set up the launch pads, a cluster of half-dozen miniature rigs with sensors, cameras, and gentle timers designed to ignite the safe fuel. Each rocket was tagged with names and stories. "For Mom, who taught me to dream," read one. "In memory of John, my best friend," said another. Harold's own rocket carried a note tucked inside the payload capsule, "To anyone who ever thought they were too old. Keep building." The countdown began. The crowd hushed, faces tilted toward the blue. 3, 2, 1, the rockets launched, rising like silver arrows cutting through the sky, trailing soft puffs of vapor. Cheers erupted as they soared, each one reaching carefully measured heights before deploying parachutes and descending gently, intact, to waiting hands below. Harold watched, his breath caught between disbelief and awe. This was more than a launch. It was a declaration. Age was not a tether but a trajectory. The launch became a ritual, repeated in waves as more rockets took flight. The local news showed up, broadcasting live from the edge of the field, interviewing Harold about his journey and the meaning behind the kits. He found himself speaking without hesitation. "We all have fuel inside, passion, memories, hope, that can propel us further than we imagine. The rockets are symbols, yes, but they're also bridges, from past to present, from doubt to action." After the final rocket landed, Harold joined the children retrieving them, their laughter ringing like music. One small boy looked up at him with wide eyes. "How old are you?" he asked. Harold chuckled. 73. "Wow. So you're like a rocket, too?" The boy grinned. "Always ready to launch." At that moment, Harold realized the truth of the boy's words. He was launching not just rockets but a movement, something that would outlast him, spark others who felt lost, invisible, or too tired to try. Back at home, as dusk painted the sky in shades of lavender and gold, Harold received a video call from Elon Musk himself. "Harold," Elon said, smiling with a tired but genuine warmth, "you and the Reignite team have done something incredible. SpaceX's mission is to push humanity forward, and you've pushed the people who push us all. I'm proud to know you." Harold blinked back tears. "Thank you, Elon. I was just trying to find a reason to keep building. Looks like I found a whole community." Elon nodded. "Keep launching, Harold. The sky's just the beginning." The call ended, but the energy stayed with Harold, a flame lit anew. He sat on the porch, looking up at the stars, the same ones Elon dreamed of reaching, and smiled. He was no longer waiting for permission to matter. He was making his own trajectory, a reusable rocket in a world too quick to discard its old tools and old souls. And in that moment, he knew the journey was far from over. Harold sat in his worn leather chair, the late afternoon sun filtering through the lace curtains, casting soft patterns on the floorboards. The quiet hum of the house was a sharp contrast to the bustling launch and summit he'd just left behind. Yet, inside, the echoes of the past stirred louder than ever. The Reignite X kits had transformed his days into a whirlwind of calls, messages, and meetings, but tonight the stillness invited memories he'd long tried to tuck away. His fingers traced the faded scar on his left hand, a souvenir from a garage accident decades ago, when impatience and inexperience collided with a power saw. That scar had been a symbol of his limitations then, a reminder of how much he'd lost, or so he thought. He closed his eyes and saw a younger Harold, full of dreams and fire, before life's weight had chipped away at his confidence. He remembered Mary's laughter, their first home filled with hopeful plans, the sound of children's footsteps echoing through hallways that now felt too empty. Regret wasn't a stranger, but tonight it felt like a visitor settling in. He thought about the years he'd wasted believing he was too old to start over, too damaged to inspire. He thought about David, who never gave up on him, and the little moments that had built the bridge from despair to purpose. The phone rang, breaking the spell. It was Claire, the documentary producer. "Harold, are you okay? I've been thinking about your story. About all of it." "I'm fine," he said, though the truth was more complicated. "Just, reflecting." Claire hesitated. "You know, people relate because you show the whole journey. The ups, the downs. The grit, the grace. That honesty, that's the rocket fuel." Harold smiled softly. "I guess I'm still learning to fly." "Well, you're soaring now. And it's changing lives." After the call, Harold found himself wandering into the garage, his sanctuary. The scent of sawdust, oil, and metal greeted him like old friends. On the workbench sat a half-finished model rocket, its sleek body awaiting final assembly. He picked up a wrench, feeling the familiar weight, and began to work. Each twist, each adjustment was a meditation, a dialogue between past and present. He thought about Elon's words at the summit: reusability was more than engineering, it was philosophy. The idea that failure was not the end, but a step toward innovation, toward growth. Harold's life was a reusable rocket in its own right, a vessel patched and repurposed, fueled by lessons learned and hope renewed. As night fell, the garage light cast long shadows. Harold worked until the moon rose high, the rocket now complete, a symbol not just of technology, but of transformation. He carefully wrote a note and slipped it inside the payload compartment: "To anyone who feels forgotten, this is for you." The next morning, Harold drove to the local library, where he'd arranged a small workshop for seniors curious about the kits. The room buzzed with quiet excitement, faces lined with stories of their own. Harold shared his journey openly, the doubts, the struggles, the breakthroughs. He encouraged questions, laughter, even tears. One woman named Ruth spoke up, her voice trembling: "I lost my husband last year. Thought my life was over. But this This gives me something to hold on to. Harold nodded, feeling the weight and warmth of her words. It's never too late to build something new. The workshop ended with a launch in the park behind the library. The rocket soared, carrying messages of resilience and renewal. Harold watched, heart full, as new stories took flight. Driving home, Harold felt a shift within, a deeper understanding that the past was not a chain but a foundation. Every scar, every regret, every joy had built the man who now helped others rise. And in that quiet acceptance, he found freedom. That night, as he lay in bed, he whispered a thank you to the stars, the same stars Elon chased, the same stars that reminded him that the sky held endless possibilities, no matter the age or the wounds. Harold woke before dawn, the soft glow of first light slipping through his bedroom window like a quiet promise. The day felt different, charged, expectant, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Today was the day he had agreed to speak at the State University's Innovation Symposium, a place where young minds gathered to dream and disrupt, where age was often seen as a relic rather than an asset. He dressed carefully, choosing his worn navy blazer that had seen countless meetings, but somehow still carried the weight of dignity. Driving through the waking town, Harold felt the familiar tremor of nerves, the question echoing quietly in his mind: was he really ready to stand before hundreds, many decades younger, and share a story about reinvention and resilience? The campus was alive with energy, students weaving through sunlit quads, conversations about artificial intelligence and space exploration drifting in the air. Harold made his way to the auditorium, where a banner read, "Innovation for all ages, bridging generations in technology and life." Emily Kwan was already there, camera crew prepping, a reassuring presence in the sea of unfamiliar faces. "You ready?" she asked with a grin. Harold nodded, swallowing down the flutter in his chest. The auditorium filled quickly, seats taken by eager students, professors, and curious townsfolk. Harold stepped onto the stage, heart pounding, but as he looked out over the crowd, something shifted. These were people hungry for stories that mattered, stories of courage, of failure, of second chances. He began by sharing the story of his youth, the dreams shelved by life's harsh realities, the years spent in silence and self-doubt. He talked about Mary, his lost dreams, the scars, both physical and emotional, that weighed on him. Then, the turning point, the moment Elon Musk's words broke through his despair, the spark that led to the Reignite X kits. He showed photos and videos of the launch, of retirees building and flying rockets, of hands trembling but hearts soaring. He spoke of reusability, not just in rockets but in life, the ability to take setbacks, failures, and doubts, and turn them into fuel for new beginnings. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. A student raised a hand. "How do you overcome the fear of failure when starting something new at your age?" Harold smiled. "Fear is universal, but it's not a full stop. It's a comma. I've learned that every attempt, even the ones that don't succeed, are steps forward. Elon's rockets land and launch again because they're designed to learn and adapt. So can we." Another hand rose. "Did you ever feel like giving up?" The question pierced his heart. "Every day," he said honestly. "But I chose to believe that age is not a barrier but a bridge. It's about mindset, support, and the willingness to try." After the talk, students and faculty swarmed him with questions, requests for advice, and words of encouragement. A young woman named Jasmine approached, her eyes bright. "Your story changed how I see my grandmother. I want to start a community makerspace for seniors. Could we collaborate?" Harold felt the familiar swell of purpose. "Absolutely. Let's build together." Outside, the sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the campus. Harold sat on a bench, watching students pass by, each carrying dreams, doubts, and hopes. He realized that his journey had become a bridge between generations, a living proof that innovation was not confined to youth but nourished by experience and resilience. That night, back at home, Harold penned letters, one to Mary, a letter of forgiveness and love he never sent, and one to himself, a vow to keep launching, building, and believing. He placed the letters in the payload compartment of a new model rocket, ready for another launch at the next community event. The horizon was no longer a limit but an invitation. And Harold was ready to fly. Harold woke to the soft hum of his phone vibrating on the bedside table, the early morning light just beginning to spill through the blinds. The screen flashed with notifications from the Reignite X community, new launch events scheduled across the country, messages from seniors sharing their stories, photos of homemade rockets soaring against clear blue skies. His heart swelled with a quiet pride he hadn't felt in years. The ripple effect was real. What began as a small spark in a quiet garage was now growing into a movement, touching lives and igniting hope far beyond his town. Over breakfast, Harold scrolled through emails. There was a message from a veteran in Ohio who'd built a rocket to honor fallen comrades, from a retired teacher in Georgia who'd launched a rocket carrying letters from her students, from a group of seniors in California organizing a Reignite festival. Each story carried a thread of resilience, connection, and renewal. The movement was no longer just about rockets, it was about reclaiming purpose and voice when the world had long since turned away. Harold's phone rang, Emily's name flashing. "Harold, we've been invited to present at the National Senior Innovators Conference next month. They want to highlight Reignite X as a model of how technology and community can empower older adults." Harold felt a surge of excitement and responsibility. "Count me in," he replied. He spent the day drafting plans, connecting with local coordinators, and preparing materials. But amid the growth, challenges emerged. Some questioned the kit's safety, others doubted seniors could truly engage with technology, and a few lamented the idea that older adults should be kept busy rather than empowered. Harold faced skepticism head-on. He crafted clear safety protocols, collaborated with healthcare professionals, and shared testimonies from participants whose lives had changed. Slowly, minds began to open. At a community center in Michigan, Harold led a workshop where a woman named Lillian shared how building and launching her rocket helped her cope with loneliness after her husband's passing. "It gave me something to look forward to," she said, voice thick with emotion. "Something to prove I still matter." Harold nodded, the truth of her words echoing his own journey. Meanwhile, David worked tirelessly on expanding the Reignite platform, adding forums for sharing stories, tutorials, and even virtual rocket-building simulations for those unable to attend in person. Technology, once a barrier, was now a bridge connecting isolated hearts and hands. One afternoon, Harold received a call from a young journalist, eager to write a feature titled "The Silver Rocket Revolution." The article painted a vivid picture of seniors defying stereotypes, launching dreams skyward, and building communities of resilience. It spread like wildfire, catching the attention of public figures and philanthropists. Donations poured in, enabling free kits for low-income and rural seniors. Harold watched as the movement transcended borders, reaching Native American reservations, Appalachian towns, and even small islands off the coast. Every launch became a celebration of life, memory, and possibility. Yet, amid the growth, Harold never lost sight of the individuals. He made it a point to write personal notes to participants, listen to their stories, and remind them that they were the true engines of this revolution. One evening, he received a letter from a man named Frank, who'd been a mechanic for decades but had long felt invisible since retirement. Frank wrote that building his first Reignite rocket rekindled a joy he thought was gone forever. Harold's eyes blurred with tears as he realized that this ripple, this movement, was about reclaiming identity and dignity. The rockets were symbols, yes, but the true power lay in human connection. At a conference keynote, Harold stood on stage, the audience a mix of ages and backgrounds, all united by a belief in the transformative power of purpose. He spoke passionately about Elon Musk's vision. Not just for space exploration but for pushing humanity to break through limitations, fear, and complacency. "We all have a rocket inside us," Harold told the crowd, "fueled by our passions, our memories, and our willingness to take the leap, no matter how many years behind us." Reusability means more than technology, it means resilience, the courage to rise again, and to build something new every day. As the crowd erupted in applause, Harold looked out and saw faces alight with hope, determination, and belief. The ripple had become a wave. That night, at home, Harold sat quietly by the window, the cool air carrying distant fireworks from a town festival. He smiled, knowing that his journey, from despair to purpose, was now part of a much larger story. Elon Musk's rockets might be reaching Mars, but these small, reusable rockets were reaching hearts, reminding everyone that it's never too late to launch. The morning sky was gray, heavy with clouds that mirrored the storm brewing inside Harold's mind. The news had broken just hours earlier, a major recall of Reignite X kits due to a manufacturing defect in the fuel capsules. Several rockets had failed to launch properly, some causing minor injuries. The headlines questioned the safety of the program, with critics claiming it was reckless to encourage seniors to handle such technology. Harold sat at his kitchen table, a stack of letters and emails from worried participants spread before him. Some expressed fear, others disappointment, and a few harsh words of blame. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls from news outlets demanding statements, from partners anxious about the future, and from community leaders questioning whether the movement could survive this setback. The weight of responsibility pressed down hard. He thought of Elon Musk's own public battles with setbacks and failures, how SpaceX had faced crashes, delays, and skeptics but refused to give up. That example was his anchor now. Harold took a deep breath and drafted a message to the community, honest and transparent, acknowledging the issue, outlining immediate safety measures, and promising a thorough investigation. He emphasized that safety was paramount and that the heart of Reignite X was about empowerment through knowledge, not risk. Over the next few days, Harold traveled to meet with affected participants, listening carefully to their concerns, offering apologies, and demonstrating new safety protocols. He worked closely with engineers and healthcare professionals to redesign the faulty components and improve training materials. The process was grueling, exhausting both physically and emotionally, but Harold refused to let fear silence the movement. In one small town, he met Margaret, an 82-year-old woman who'd suffered a minor burn during a failed launch. She smiled weakly and said, "It's not the rockets that scare me, it's losing the chance to fly again." Those words struck Harold deeply. This was bigger than technology or headlines, it was about hope. He renewed his commitment to the mission, knowing that setbacks were part of every journey worth taking. Media coverage gradually shifted as Harold's openness and decisive action gained respect. Stories of resilience replaced fearmongering. The movement's momentum, though shaken, was not broken. In fact, many new participants joined, inspired by the courage to face challenges head-on. Meanwhile, David spearheaded the launch of a comprehensive online safety course, complete with videos, quizzes, and virtual practice modules, designed to ensure every participant felt confident and informed before building or launching. The Reignite X platform grew stronger, more inclusive, more robust. Harold also took time to reflect privately, journaling late into the night about the lessons learned. He thought about Elon's famous words on failure: "Failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough." Harold realized that embracing failure, owning it, and learning from it was the ultimate act of courage, especially when age and society's expectations added layers of pressure. Weeks later, at a community event designed to relaunch the program with new safety measures, Harold stood before a crowd that had grown even more determined. The gray clouds had given way to patches of blue, a symbol of renewal. He spoke openly about the storm they'd faced together and the strength found in vulnerability and action. "This is not just a launch of rockets," he said. "It's a launch of trust, resilience, and belief in ourselves." As the new rockets ascended smoothly into the sky, the crowd erupted in cheers, a collective exhale after the tension and uncertainty. Harold felt tears prick his eyes. Not from relief alone but from a deep sense of belonging and purpose restored. That night, as he sat by the fireplace, the embers glowing warm, Harold realized the storm had changed him. It had tested his resolve, challenged his faith, and ultimately proved that the spirit to soar could withstand the harshest winds. Elon's example had been a guiding light, but this was Harold's own journey, one marked not by flawless success, but by the unyielding courage to face failure, learn, and rise again. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: he and the Reignite community were ready for whatever came next. The small-town community center was alive with a mix of anticipation and cautious optimism as Harold prepared for the day's most ambitious project yet, a joint workshop bringing together seniors from the Reignite X program and a group of local high school students fascinated by space and engineering. The goal was simple but profound: to bridge generations through shared curiosity, learning, and the universal thrill of launching a rocket into the sky. Harold felt the familiar flutter of nerves, not from fear, but from the weight of possibility. After months of building the movement and weathering setbacks, this event felt like the true test of what Reignite X could become, a living symbol of connection, not just innovation. The room filled quickly, the scent of fresh coffee mingling with the metallic tang of model rockets. Seniors with weathered hands and bright eyes sat alongside teens clutching notebooks and smartphones, each group hesitant but curious. Harold opened with a story about his own doubts and fears, about how Elon Musk's relentless push to defy limits inspired him to find purpose in the unexpected chapters of life. He spoke of reusability not only in rockets but in human spirit, urging everyone to see age not as a wall but as a bridge. Then the work began. The students, energized by their tech savvy and creativity, eagerly jumped into designing rocket fins and crafting payloads. The seniors brought patience, wisdom, and stories of perseverance, teaching techniques honed from years of hands-on experience, from carpentry to chemistry. At first, the divide seemed wide. Teens struggled to slow down and listen, seniors hesitated to ask for help with unfamiliar apps and gadgets. But slowly, barriers melted away as laughter, questions, and shared discoveries filled the air. Emily Kwan captured moments of tentative teamwork turning into genuine camaraderie, hands helping hands, advice traded across generations. At one table, 17-year-old Marcus, a robotics enthusiast, marveled at Eleanor's steady hands as she carefully attached rocket fins. "You're like a pro," he said, eyes wide with respect. Eleanor smiled, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening with pride. "Years of fixing things, dear. You learn a thing or two." Meanwhile, Harold noticed something deeper unfolding. Beyond the rockets and engineering, a healing was taking place. The seniors found validation in being seen not as relics but as mentors. The teens discovered strength in stories of resilience and lived experience. When it came time for the launch, everyone gathered outside, the cold air sharp but electric with excitement. Rockets built in collaboration stood ready on the launch pads, their colors bright, their payloads carrying messages, dreams, and even small tokens exchanged between generations. Harold gave the signal, and one by one, the rockets soared skyward, trailing smoke and hope. Cheers erupted as the rockets reached their apex, moments of silence as they parachuted gently back to Earth, then laughter and applause as retrieval teams brought them home. Marcus hugged Eleanor, the gap between young and old narrowing to a shared spark. Afterward, Harold gathered the group inside for reflection. "What did we learn today?" he asked. Hands shot up, lessons about patience, curiosity, respect, and the power of coming together. A young girl named Sophia spoke up, eyes shining. "I never thought I'd be friends with someone twice my age. Today, I learned we're all just people with stories and dreams." Harold nodded, heart full. And that's the true power of innovation. It's not just about technology, but about connection, empathy, and lifting each other up. Over the following weeks, the workshop became a model replicated in other towns, sparking programs pairing seniors with youth in everything from coding clubs to gardening projects. The ripple effect expanded from rockets to relationships, reminding communities that wisdom and curiosity are not confined by years but enriched by them. One afternoon, Harold received a call from an old friend, Tom, whom he hadn't spoken to in years. "I saw the video from the workshop," Tom said, voice warm but hesitant. I'm sorry for drifting away back then. Maybe it's time to reconnect, to build something together again. Harold smiled, the bridge he had built reaching across not just generations but past regrets and lost time. The sky outside was a canvas of soft pinks and golds, a reminder that every day held the promise of new horizons. That night, Harold sat by the window, looking at the stars Elon had set his sights on, feeling deeply grounded. The movement was no longer just about rockets or reinvention, it was about healing divides, creating belonging, and proving that it's never too late to launch new dreams, together. The crisp autumn air was filled with a sense of urgency as Harold walked through the bustling workshop that had become the heart of the Reignite X movement. Tables overflowed with rocket parts, blueprints, and laptops, while volunteers, mostly seniors, but now joined by younger enthusiasts, moved with a shared purpose that seemed to defy age and circumstance. It was here, amid the hum of creativity and collaboration, that Harold had come to believe something extraordinary was happening, a revolution not just of technology, but of spirit and possibility. Today's focus was on developing a new, eco-friendly fuel capsule inspired by Elon Musk's relentless pursuit of innovation and sustainability. The old fuel had served well, but as the program expanded, Harold knew it was time to push boundaries again, making the rocket safer, cleaner, and even more accessible. He glanced over at David, who was deep in conversation with a chemical engineer named Laura, a recent graduate passionate about green technology. We need to find a fuel that's powerful but safe enough for beginners, and that minimizes environmental impact, Laura explained. Harold nodded thoughtfully. Elon's philosophy is to take bold risks but always aim for progress that benefits everyone. That's what we want here. Across the room, volunteers worked on 3D printed rocket parts, while others fine-tuned software for flight simulations. The diversity of skills was staggering, retired teachers, engineers, artists, veterans, all united by a shared mission. As the day wore on, Harold found himself reflecting on how far the movement had come from the solitary nights of building in his garage. What had started as a spark inspired by Elon Musk's audacious vision had grown into a wildfire of hope and empowerment for people many had written off as too old to change. Yet the road ahead was not without challenges. Funding was tight, skeptics lingered, and Harold often felt the pressure of responsibility, not just to the rockets, but to every person whose life had been touched by Reignite X. Late that evening, as the workshop quieted, Harold met with Emily and David to strategize next steps. They discussed outreach to schools, grant applications, and the possibility of partnering with local governments to expand accessibility. Harold shared a letter he'd received from a participant named Ruth, who wrote about how the program helped her find joy and connection after losing her spouse. "Stories like hers remind me why we do this," Harold said softly. "It's more than rockets, it's about fueling the future of our community, our lives." The following weeks were a whirlwind of testing prototypes, refining safety measures, and coordinating launches. The team celebrated small victories, successful test flights, new volunteers joining, and positive feedback from participants. Each success was a reminder of Elon Musk's relentless drive to iterate, improve, and push beyond limits. Then came the moment they'd been working toward, a public launch event to unveil the new eco-friendly fuel capsule, symbolizing a new chapter for Reignite X. The day dawned clear and bright, the launch site buzzing with excitement. Families, friends, local media, and supporters gathered, their faces shining with anticipation. Harold stood by the launch pad, heart pounding but steady. He looked at the rockets lined up, their new fuel capsules gleaming under the sun, a testament to innovation born from collaboration and courage. As the countdown began, Harold felt a swell of gratitude, for the community that had grown, for the setbacks overcome, and for the chance to prove that age and adversity were no barriers to dreaming big. The rockets soared, their engines roaring with power yet clean and controlled, rising higher than ever before. Cheers erupted as they gracefully descended, the parachutes unfurling perfectly. Cameras captured the moment, the smiles, the tears of joy. Harold knew this was more than a launch, it was a symbol of resilience, hope, and the enduring human spirit. After the event, Harold addressed the crowd, his voice strong and clear. Elon Musk once said that the future belongs to those who dare to dream and refuse to give up. Today, we prove that dreaming, and launching, knows no age. Together, we are fueling the future, one rocket at a time. As the crowd dispersed, Harold lingered, feeling the weight of a journey that had transformed him and so many others. The rockets, once simple symbols of escape and exploration, had become vehicles of healing, connection, and empowerment. That night, under a sky filled with stars, Harold sat by his window and thought about the endless horizons ahead. Elon's vision had sparked the fire, but it was the community, the courage, and the willingness to keep trying that fueled the future. And Harold knew that, like his rockets, their stories would keep rising, again and again. The conference hall was vast and filled with a hum of anticipation as Harold stepped onto the stage to deliver the keynote speech at the National Senior Innovators Summit. The room was packed with faces that reflected every shade of experience, some wrinkled with decades of wisdom, others bright-eyed with newfound purpose. As Harold looked out, he felt the weight of the journey that had brought him here, from a lonely garage project to a movement challenging assumptions about aging, technology, and possibility. What if everything you believed about getting old was wrong? Harold began, echoing the question that had sparked his own transformation. The audience leaned in, curiosity lighting the room like an electric current. Harold shared stories of setbacks and triumphs, the safety recalls, the workshops bridging generations, the eco-friendly fuel capsules, and most importantly, the lives changed. He spoke not as a man who had found all the answers but as one who had learned the power of courage, resilience, and community. Elon Musk taught me that failure isn't the opposite of success, it's part of it. That the future belongs to those who dare to keep trying, no matter the obstacles. We don't have to be young to be bold. We don't have to be perfect to make a difference. He paused, scanning the faces before him, many nodding, some with tears glistening. Reignite X is more than rockets, it's about reclaiming identity, purpose, and connection at every stage of life. It's about breaking barriers, between generations, between fears, between the past and the future. After the speech, Harold was surrounded by attendees eager to share their own stories and ideas. Among them was Dr. Elena Ramirez, a gerontologist specializing in aging and technology, who praised the program's impact on mental health and social engagement. "Your work is a beacon, Harold," she said. "It's exactly what our society needs to rethink how we view aging." Outside the conference, a reporter asked Harold about the future of Reignite X. "What's next?" she queried. Harold smiled, thinking about the endless sky above. "We're just getting started. We want to expand globally, incorporate more advanced technologies like augmented reality, and continue building bridges, between people, communities, and dreams." He recounted a letter from a participant in Japan, who had adapted the kits to honor her culture's traditions while embracing innovation. The ripple effect was crossing oceans. Back home, Harold found himself reflecting on the paradox of aging, the physical limitations, the societal doubts, but also the profound capacity for reinvention and impact. He realized that Elon Musk's rockets, designed to reach the stars, were also metaphors for human potential, reusable, resilient, and relentless. In the quiet of his workshop, surrounded by model rockets and memories, Harold began drafting plans for a memoir, not just about space and rockets, but about the journeys within, the fears faced, and the courage to rise. He wanted to share a message with anyone feeling left behind or forgotten, that it's never too late to launch again, to discover new frontiers inside yourself. One afternoon, a surprise visitor arrived. Maya, a granddaughter he hadn't seen since childhood, now a young engineer inspired by her grandfather's story. She brought with her ideas for integrating sustainable materials and robotics into the kits, bridging family and future. Together, they worked late into the night, laughter and conversation weaving new bonds. As the sun set, Harold looked at the stars and felt a deep sense of peace. The rockets might one day carry humans to Mars, but here on Earth, the real voyage was in the hearts reignited, the lives transformed, and the new frontiers crossed every day. In that moment, Harold knew the journey would never truly end. It was a continuous launch, fueled by hope, fueled by courage, fueled by the simple truth that every life matters, at every age. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over Harold's backyard, illuminating the worn wooden benches, the scattered rocket parts, and the small launch pad he had built years ago. The air was filled with a mixture of crisp autumn leaves and the faint scent of smoke from the last successful launch. Sitting quietly on the bench, Harold held a worn notebook, the journal he had kept through every twist and turn of the Reignite X journey. Flipping through its pages, he saw the scrawled dreams, fears, setbacks, and triumphs that had shaped not only rockets but his own life. It had been a decade since the first spark, the moment when a televised SpaceX launch inspired him to believe that reinvention was possible, no matter age or circumstance. At 72, Harold was not the same man who had once doubted his worth, who felt invisible and too old to change. He had been transformed, not by some miraculous overnight success, but by persistent effort, community, and the refusal to accept the limits society had placed on him. The neighborhood around him was alive with the sounds of children playing and neighbors chatting, a testament to the networks he had helped build, intergenerational friendships rooted in curiosity and respect. Across town, the Reignite X program thrived in schools, senior centers, and community hubs. Its reach had extended far beyond the original vision, inspiring similar movements nationwide. Harold's phone buzzed with messages from participants sharing new projects and milestones. He smiled, feeling a deep sense of connection and purpose. Looking up at the sky streaked with the first stars of evening, Harold thought about Elon Musk. Not just as a symbol of radical innovation but as a catalyst for dreaming without boundaries. Musk's vision of reusable rockets had changed space travel forever, but for Harold, it had also changed how he saw himself and what was possible in the later chapters of life. He remembered telling a crowd years ago, "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again." Now, he understood that permission was something he, and everyone, could grant themselves. In the months leading up to this quiet evening, Harold had received an invitation from a major documentary filmmaker interested in telling the story of Reignite X and its impact. The filmmaker wanted to capture not just the technology but the human stories, the moments of doubt and courage, the broken relationships healed, the barriers shattered. Harold agreed, knowing that sharing this story might inspire countless others who felt lost or forgotten. That night, as the camera crew filmed him preparing rockets and talking with volunteers, Harold found himself reflecting on the lessons he wanted to pass on. He spoke candidly about fear, failure, and hope. "Change doesn't always come easy or fast," he said. "But it comes when we dare to start, when we keep going even when the world says no, and when we build something bigger than ourselves." After filming wrapped, Harold stepped outside and looked up again at the vast, starry sky. He felt a surge of gratitude, for the people who had joined him on this journey, for the setbacks that had taught resilience, for the unexpected friendships and new beginnings. In that moment, he realized his legacy wasn't about rockets or fame, but about the lives reignited and the message that age is not a cage but a key. As Harold prepared to close his notebook for the night, he penned a final entry: the journey was never about reaching some distant place. It was about the courage to launch, to rise again, to believe in the impossible. "I thought it was the end, but it was just a new beginning." The next morning, Harold woke early, his heart light and steady. He stepped outside to the small launch pad, where a new batch of participants, young and old, were gathering, ready to build and launch their own rockets. The air buzzed with excitement and possibility, a living testament to the power of one spark to ignite many fires. Watching them, Harold smiled. The future was bright, filled with endless horizons and stories yet to be told. The spirit of exploration, reinvention, and connection was alive and soaring, just like the rockets that rose, again and again, into the boundless sky. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?